Tracy Donegan is a midwife, mom, author of several books, and founder of the award-winning Gentle Birth program and app. Tracy's work specializes in the application of mindfulness and compassion training to improve maternal and infant birth outcomes, mental health, and breastfeeding duration. Her vision is to create an international community of mindful, compassionate parents who will lead a new generation of a more conscious, compassionate, joyful society. Tracy originates from Ireland and now lives in Texas with her husband, Phil, and two boys, Cooper and Jack. Tracy, what myth are you going to bust for us today?
I am going to talk a little bit about how breastfeeding does not have to be such a horrible experience for so many especially first-time moms. I want to introduce you to a concept of breastfeeding that's a little different compared to what most moms are being taught in classes. So there's some good news and there's some bad news. So I think we'll start with the bad news because let's just get that out of the way.
Okay.
But it can give people a little bit of a gut check when we talk about the bad news first. But like a band-aid, we'll rip it off and we'll move on. But
Great.
for many of your viewers who are watching or listening today, you are not likely to reach your breastfeeding goals,
Mm,
whatever
okay.
they may be. No, if your breastfeeding goals is a week, you may reach that goal. But if you have plans to breastfeed for 6 months or a year, maybe even 2 years, majority of expectant moms watching this show will not reach those goals.
Wow.
So that's the bad news, and significant news for, as a birth professional, you'll agree that we know there are so many benefits to breastfeeding for mom's health, baby's health, psychological health. So there's huge numbers of women out there who did not meet their breastfeeding goals and have been kind of left to mentally deal with that. So there's some interesting research by Professor Amy Brown on breastfeeding grief and breastfeeding trauma. And it's not something we even consider, like, how do you get breastfeeding grief? But if breastfeeding is something that is really important to you and is meaningful for you, and if you feel like it is, like, of course I'm going to breastfeed, there's no question. It's important to me that this is the best start for my baby. It's important, to nurture my baby, whatever those reasons are for you, you're more likely to experience breastfeeding grief,
Mm,
especially if you don't get to reach those goals. If you stop, and what we're seeing in the research is that if you stop before you wanted to, that you're more likely to be anxious, more likely to experience depression, and other mental health problems, because we know that breastfeeding that's going well is supportive of mental health.
mm,
So that's the bad news. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is a way to change this. And what I'm suggesting is, let me see, well, is it a rebel act or a radical act? But I'm suggesting that we start to look at breastfeeding initiation through the lens of undisturbed birth.
okay.
So let's talk about undisturbed breastfeeding. What does that look like? So, as birth professionals, you and I are very aware of what undisturbed birth looks like. It is about, for us, as midwives and doulas, that we are, stepping back. We are, as long as mom is coping and she's in that labor land brain, that the lighting is dim, we're stepping back so she can get into that physiological process. Nobody is standing there telling her to change positions. Well, we hope nobody is there.
Exactly.
We are just follow your body's lead. Your baby will tell you what it needs from you. So why is it that as doulas and midwives and nurses that we see, we know what are the components for this physiological act of labor.
Mhm.
But then we look at breastfeeding, and then it becomes a checklist and
Yeah.
this list of to-dos, which is so encroaching and inhibitive of mom's maternal instincts, that we have, up until 5 minutes ago, we were encouraging you to follow your body's lead, you know what to do. But then once the baby's here, no, she does not know what to do anymore. We have to teach her this next physiological act,
Mm,
which is in activating a different part of her brain, So when we sit a woman up, as we generally do, sitting on a sore perineum, and I know and my memory of first breastfeeding was a lot of hands on
Mm,
me
yeah.
and people doing it for me, which of course I wasn't learning anything then. But even the concept of teaching somebody when they're in that labor land brain, which she is still in,
Mhm,
is it's going to inhibit her maternal behavior.
mhm,
And just the fact that we have sat mom up, we have gravity is impacting all of baby's influence, baby's instincts and reflexes. So baby has, I think, 20 primitive, these neonatal reflexes that baby is born with to find and access their food source. All mammals do this. But what we do is we sit mom up in a position that's going to inhibit those reflexes from baby. So then mom is getting more stressed. She has more hands on. And unfortunately for a lot of nurses, especially here in the US, we got to get the box checked to get
yeah,
you in down to postpartum. It's a process. So what we are looking at here is, okay, let's look at Suzanne Colson's work, and taking a mind body approach. So we'll start with the body piece first, which is get mom in a more laid back position.
okay.
So a recent randomized controlled trial show that in Italy, if we laid women back
Mm.
into what I call a semi-recumbent position. I call it the Netflix position. So when you're gonna chill, watch a bit of Netflix,
Yeah.
and we have mom not flat but in a nice reclined position, and baby's full body on mom. So the full body is what triggers baby's feeding behaviors. But
Mhm,
when we sit mom up in that typist position, not only is it uncomfortable for mom, it's not particularly comfortable for baby either. And as first time moms, we're very nervous and all arms and trying to figure out these different holds. So we've made it so much more complicated in those early days than it needs to be. We haven't been telling moms that they can feed their baby in a sleepy, drowsy state, which, of course, postpartum doulas and midwives who are out in the community have known this for a million years. But we don't have to wake the baby.
mhm,
So when I think of new moms who are fresh out of hospital and feeling probably very overwhelmed with, because the perfect latch has like 15 bloody steps to it. And it's like, how can that be a physiological process if we have, feet on the floor, sit upright, don't lean, bring your baby to you, all of these little pieces of instruction and complicated holds, the football, the rugby, yeah, I'm like, give me a gin and tonic hold. That's what I would probably like in that moment of there's so much stress and trying to teach this mom to feed her baby. We have never have had more access to information than we do at the moment in the world with instant, access to technology. But if information was enough,
mhm.
moms would be reaching their breastfeeding goals.
Right.
They're going to the classes, they're reading the books. But let's look at the books for a minute. So the books that we keep being told breastfeeding is natural. It's
Mhm.
natural, and as women, we feel like it is natural. It's almost an extension of my mothering kind of toolkit. But then it's like, but it's so natural that the books on breastfeeding are like 50,000 pages long.
I know.
That's something's not adding up here. So we talk about this naturalness, and then women come into postpartum and they're like, you lied to me, you told me this was natural. But we've done kind of all the wrong. We've sat her up, we've taught her that she has to follow these 15 really critical steps to get that baby to latch on correctly. We
Mhm,
haven't been teaching biological nurturing. We haven't been teaching moms how to trigger those neonatal, those newborn behaviors, and we haven't, so that mom can't even access her own maternal behavior because she's in such a stress state. So that's kind of the first part. When you look at a mind body approach, the body being in that moment that mom is being encouraged to lay back.
mhm,
Let's trigger all of those feeding behaviors on mom's body, and
mhm.
not just the laid back position, but the laid back staff too.
Mm,
because we
yes.
need the laid backs, that we need the staff who, those staff who are watching this video saying, yeah, I know what Michelle O'Donnell's talking about when he talks about undisturbed birth. So where did we go so wrong that when it comes to breastfeeding, that we think we can teach a physiological innate behavior, and we can't. We cannot do it. And but we can definitely help women prepare, but we want to help them in a way that's actually going to, that's evidence based. I was talking to some midwives recently, and I asked them, do you ever do the biological nurturing positions? They're like, well, sometimes the moms don't like it. And I'm like, well, is that because they've never seen it? And they think, we're kind of conditioned to sit upright, and, as like feeding frequently throughout the night, sitting upright all of those times, it's just going to make breastfeeding more difficult. So when I asked them, well, can you tell me what's an evidence-based breastfeeding position? Because you can tell me all about evidence-based birth, but I want to hear about evidence-based breastfeeding. And there was crickets, because they assumed that, well, what we're doing, well, it's the 20-step UNICEF baby friendly, so isn't that evidence-based? We want to be teaching, if we're talking about evidence-based birth, we want to continue that into the postpartum and help moms have an easier postpartum by understanding how to feed when baby's in a drowsy state. Imagine having your postpartum, most of your postpartum, like in bed, those first kind of 2 weeks when you're just trying to build up that milk supply, get baby back to birth weight, and you're in a Netflix position with your baby here, and you don't have to be worried about, oh, the baby's cues that I keep hearing about. What does he need now? Because while baby is here on the breast, they will feed in a drowsy state. So you're recovering more quickly, you're getting your milk supply established, and baby is more comfortable as well. And it's a more relaxed state for everybody. So again, we've got a quicker recovery. So that was the first aspect. But then when we look at talking to moms who have found breastfeeding to be difficult, and not just breastfeeding, but postpartum itself, as pardon my French, but the shit show of postpartum. And it is, in the research, we call it a predictable crisis. So every single birth professional, every single lactation consultant, everyone who's involved in the baby business knows that at the end of this pregnancy, the shit show is coming. Okay.
Yes.
So how are we helping parents prepare for that emotional, that is the most intense experience, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, that a woman is going to go through, and in some respects her partner as well. But we're not giving them a toolkit that can provide an anchor for them in some very, very stormy seas. We know that relationships take a hit after the first baby. We know that mental health can take a hit after baby is born as well, for both partners. So what I want to see is a different approach, which, similar to gentle birth, about birth brain training for birth, that we're starting to introduce a kind of a psychological set of a toolkit for expectant parents, so that they have some tools on, when baby is here and they start to question their own ability to mother, their perceptions around milk supply, all of those things that we look at. Okay, it's, when it comes to postpartum, some of the biggest reasons why moms stop breastfeeding is perceived lack of milk, pain. No, well, we're figuring out the pain thing. If we lay mom back, that randomized controlled trial showed women who were assigned to the biological nurturing position in right after birth were significantly less likely to have any nipple pain leaving the hospital. So I think let's start there. But if we can figure out pain and give parents tools, which is why, for me, mindfulness training and compassion around your experience is so important, for not just for mental health, but for women who feel really strongly about supporting themselves through this really, really intense transition of their adult life. And in the event that they don't reach those breastfeeding goals, or for whatever reason that they need to stop, that they also have tools to support themselves emotionally through that grief or that trauma because they've had to stop. So there is really compelling evidence now that mindfulness is a fantastic tool to help parents deal with the huge emotions that are coming. It doesn't, it's not, we can't turn those emotions off. It's going to progress through the postpartum as things settle down. But we want to give parents tools that they can help themselves when it's, 4 o'clock in the morning and you've already called your postpartum doula twice that night already. And you need inner resources to support yourself. And at that time when you don't have any, what's the answer? For so many women, the answer is, we're not doing this anymore because I feel so badly. And it's when you talk to women about their breastfeeding experience, so much of it is about how they feel about it.
Mhm.
So, and their feelings are of course influenced by how they think. So if
Yeah.
we can help more moms understand that, first of all, don't believe everything you think,
Mhm.
especially at 4 a.m. because
Yes.
that default setting of the brain is to go to worst case scenario. So that self-talk of, I'm no good at this, or I'm starving my baby, or whatever that self-talk is, um to be able to kind of step back from it and notice it and like, hey, I am really exhausted at this point. Baby is cluster feeding and I feel like I've been feeding all night.
Mhm.
My partner's doing what he can to help or what she's doing to help, but I'm losing my mind. I just cannot do this. So it's so much of this is about compassion practices and offering ourselves compassion, which is women we find really hard to do. We're
Right.
so resistant to offering ourselves compassion, but it's that whole metaphor of, you can't, you have to fill your own cup first. So if we start practicing these, and I'm talking about short meditation, I'm talking about 10 or 15 minutes. So it is, I mean, yes, it means like 10 minutes, might be 10 minutes less of your favorite TV show, or 10 minutes less of, doom scrolling on Facebook, but it's a worthwhile endeavor because in pregnancy, your brain is changing just due to pregnancy hormones. So your brain is wiring to connect with your baby and bond with your baby. But with modern living, and we have lost the ability to slow down and really pay attention to what's actually going on up here. I always talk about it being, uh, you probably know how to work your smartphone backwards. You know all the little tricks and everything. You know your partner really well. But then it comes to like what's going on upstairs. This constant companion. If we're not aware of what's going on up there, it's going to disrail or derail your breastfeeding experience. Because
Mhm.
if it comes down to thoughts and feelings and feeling bad, nobody's going to choose to feel bad. We're going to look for, and for some moms, the most compassionate and the most courageous thing they can do is to stop breastfeeding.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
we want to catch them before we get to that point. So if we can, in pregnancy, start helping moms understand there are different positions that you can do and different ways to make breastfeeding so much easier. We
Mhm.
figure out the body piece. We have a partner that will advocate for this, biological nurturing. And then they've already been practicing with some mindfulness practices, which is changing the brain. It is affecting changes the brain areas associated with positive mood.
Mhm.
So there's no real downside to these short practices.
Sure.
But when we look at the other end of the spectrum, there's huge upside when we look at the breastfeeding numbers as they
Mhm.
stand today.
Right.
And they're not going in an upward trajectory, unfortunately, in most well developed countries.
Tracy, that's brilliant. So you're saying learning these mindfulness tools, starting to practice them, and because your brain is elastic, especially in pregnancy. And so that by the time you actually reach the actual breastfeeding experience, you've been primed, you've been prepped, you are ready to do it differently and do it better.
Exactly. And it's and there's so one thing that I kind of struggle with, over the past kind of couple of months developing this program is that why has there been this disconnect, and why is it that care providers are so resistant to improving mental health when it comes to breastfeeding. Interesting again, when I look at, the books on breastfeeding, and they're, this size, and then I went looking for where are all the resources to support mental health and breastfeeding. And I found Amy Brown's book and Kathleen Kendall Tackett, but we're talking about like this size books for natural breastfeeding, and then we have this size for supporting mental health.
Wow.
So it's like, and we know it's a huge factor, so let's come back a few paces, help parents understand how the mind works and how it's going to trip you up in postpartum if you're not supervising it. And I mean like just being aware of, oh, when I say things like I'm a crap mom, or my baby doesn't like my milk because baby's fighting at the breast, or doesn't like me, that we catch ourselves, and our partners are tuned into it as well. So even though it might be a habit of thought to speak negatively to ourselves, and most of us probably don't even realize it, but now if we have our partners involved as well, and our partners catch us with some of those comments, we have someone to support us and just remind us, thoughts aren't facts. We don't have to believe everything we think. And when we can get into that state of like out of the stress response, and postpartum, unfortunately, for so many women is a chronic stress response. If we can give them tools to reduce that stress response, increase oxytocin, they also have that clarity of thought where you can actually stand back and make the best decisions for you and your family, instead of this right, it feels like a quicksand of postpartum negativity that so many moms go through. So there is a way to change postpartum. We've got to start up here.
I love that, Tracy. So, how are you doing that? How are you achieving this goal of training brains for breastfeeding?
Yeah, so it's very similar to what we've done in gentle birth. So we're using different practices to train the brain to have different expectations of that breastfeeding experience. There's meditations that are based on like we do a body scan, but there's also a body scan that we do that is about finding the positives. Again, when we look at the research for as women, we tend to have a very, well, let's just say, not a great relationship with our body in general.
Yes.
And even if we can kind of grow to like it, or be okay with it in pregnancy, postpartum can bring up so much, mental stuff for us about our body, about our breasts and whether they work. And we know that the vast majority of women can breastfeed. The human race would never have survived otherwise. And I guarantee you, back in the hunter gatherer days, those women were not getting up from their bed or their nest, wherever they were lying with their family, and going and sitting on a big hard rock in the corner of the cave to sit in an upright position and nurse their babies. It's just, but we've just like thrown everything at it, trying to raise these breastfeeding rates. It's like, okay, what we're doing is not working. So let's take a moment to reevaluate. Let's help parents understand how their mind works, how it works when you're stressed, and start looking at ways that we can get moms to befriend their body. And this season of their life that is going to be tough. It is going to be difficult. But let's give them the tool. Let's not put them. I think of it as, you're sent off out into the ocean in this little rowing boat, and they postpartum, good luck. We'll see you on the other side. With no life raft, with no tools, with no survival skills for postpartum. So yeah, so for me, it's about let's train the brain.
Tracy, tell us about the free gift that you have for our viewers.
I wanted to give everyone it's an MP3 of positive breastfeeding affirmations. So it's something that you can, play it in the car, play it when you're out for a walk, or, if you're kind of relaxing in the evening, because one of the, I guess, strongest predictors when we look at, again, mental and emotional health when it comes to stopping breastfeeding is our self-talk. So for so many women, again, approaching breastfeeding, we want to start replacing some of those that negative self-talk with words around
I love
confidence.
that. Tracy, thank you so much for your wisdom and coming to share with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to chat birth and babies and breastfeeding all day long.